How's it going, everybody? My name's Shane, and welcome back to the Horror Basement. Today we'll be reviewing The Monster Maker from 1944. Now, the primary characters in this are Anthony, who is a concert pianist, his daughter, Patricia, and Patricia's boyfriend, Bob, who is also Anthony's manager. The film starts and he's doing a recital or a concert, and Patricia and Bob are sitting up in one of the boxes listening. And in the box beside them, uh, a shady looking man with a goatee and another woman are also watching the recital. But the fellow decides to stop listening to the music and just start creepily staring at Patricia. Uh, and we later learn that this fellow is Dr. Igor Markov, the shady German villain of the movie because this was made during World War II. And he is enamored with Patricia because she is identical to his dead wife. So as time goes on, he starts sending flowers and poetry to addressed to Patricia, and this upsets her because he's 20, 30 years older than her. And so Anthony, her father, decides to go over to Dr. Markov's lab slash office to tell him to stop basically sexually harassing his daughter. But since this was made back in the 40s and the term sexual harassment wasn't really coined until the 60s, as he's berating Dr. Markov for this, he just used the term annoying. Like, you gotta stop annoying my daughter, you're being a menace, you're annoying her, and all this. And in response to this, Markov takes a candle holder, not unlike these ones, and bashes Anthony in the head with it. And then while he's, prostrate on the floor, he goes back into his lab and grabs a bottle of acromegaly, which, if you don't know, is a pituitary gland disorder that causes the enlargement of the head and other extremities. And we'll talk about that more later. But he goes back in and somehow, it's done off screen so we don't know, but he somehow administers acromegaly to Anthony. And then, calls Patricia and has him come pick up Anthony and says, it'll be my word against yours. You can't prove that I did anything to you. So after this, there's a bit of a time skip. It's said that it's been a couple weeks later. And Anthony has basically locked himself in his music room and is refusing to come out. And so Patricia and Bob finally force their way into his room. And his head is turned into pretty much a giant potato. His normal face is still visible, but he's wearing this prosthetic that makes his head, oblong and misshapen. And he's wearing these gloves, pretty much, that make his... You can tell they're like a rubber or a latex prosthetic, but they make his hands appear to have grown in size exponentially as well. So in seeing this, Patricia faints, and in the ensuing time, while Bob is dealing with her, Anthony rushes off to go confront Markov, and basically comes in and says that he's gonna kill Dr. Markov, but Markov's goons, because he has these burly lab assistant looking dudes that do his dirty work for him, they restrain and sedate Anthony. And in the meantime, we haven't really talked much about Maxine, who is Markov's assistant. She's helping him, and what their research is in regards to is actually finding a cure for acromegaly. So they have, right now they're working on Formula X53 and Formula X54. And X53 is supposed to stop the spread of acromegaly, and they're working on X54, which is supposed to somehow reverse the effects of it and essentially cure the disorder. And Maxine is upset because Markov loves or is pining after Patricia as opposed to her. And she's also upset because Markov's pet gorilla that he keeps in a cage in the corner of his lab doesn't like her and is always trying to attack her. So she realizes what Markov has done to Anthony, essentially infecting him with acromegaly, and decides that she's gonna, go to the cops or, expose his dastardly deeds. So Markov's idea is to release the gorilla and let the gorilla take care of Maxine. Which in this we get some really good gorilla acting. Like the dude in the gorilla suit does a much more convincing job than the one in the last movie we reviewed, the gorilla. But Markov's other pet, his German Shepherd, because German Nazi scientist bad guy, his dog ends up somehow getting the gorilla back into his cage, and Maxine's totally fine. But instead of running away and going to the cops, she's still kind of hanging around Markov's office and lab, and I guess just biding her time to when she can double cross him, which happens later. So Markov lays out his scheme to Anthony while he's, tied up in bed. He has, he's restrained so he won't hurt himself, but really it's to stop him from beating Markov's ass. And he says, I'll give you the cure if you let me marry Patricia. And the other part of his scheme is to get Patricia over to the place and watch as he cures or takes care of her father, so that she will, just through that, feel indebted to him and then fall in love with him. So he calls Patricia, and she heads over there. And she's freaking out because Anthony is tied to the bed, and he's trying to explain to her that, Markov is bad. But he can't really get this across because he's still all doped up from what Markov's dudes gave him, and also having trouble really speaking, because at this point his head is just 3 times the size of a normal head. And not long after Patricia heads over, the butler informs Bob, the boyfriend, of where she's going, and he races over to help her because he knows he hasn't figured out the whole scheme. He knows something's up, and he doesn't like Markov. So he gets there just as the goons are trying to tie up and take care of Maxine. So he knocks out the goons, and basically they meet up with Patricia just as Anthony, the dad, breaks out of his restraints. And there's a tussle between him and Markov, which happens off screen. And then they hear a gunshot, and they rush into the room where the two of them were. And Markov is laying dead on the floor. Apparently, he was shot in the ensuing scuffle as they were fighting over the gun. And all the main characters are real sad because they don't, with Markov dead, because it was established that he's the leading scientist in regards to acromegaly. They're sad because now Anthony will never get the cure, but Maxine's no, we figured that out. And then we jump cut to another piano recital where Anthony is completely cured. He's back to his normal self, and he kind of, waves at Patricia and Bob from the stage, and then the credits roll and all the characters, everyone lives happily ever after. Now, from a technical standpoint, there are a couple things I wanted to say about this movie. For one, the quality of the film is not great. There's a lot of lines and cigarette marks that show up just throughout the film in random places. It looks like the film wasn't in great shape when they got a hold of it to port this onto DVD or however they did it. And also, as far as the production of the movie itself, a lot of it's shot indoors, and the sets look very, cheaply made. The door frames and everything look like they're pretty much made of like particle board. Now, everything's made up to look very fancy, like Anthony and Patricia's house and Markov's office is meant to look very fancy, but it looks very like a cheap set, pretty much. But beyond that, I found the movie as a whole enjoyable. Now, just to touch on one thing, acromegaly isn't a disorder that they made up for the purpose of this movie. It is a real thing that is caused when the pituitary gland puts out too much human growth hormone, and in adults who have their growth plates already fused, it causes to enlargement of primarily the head, hands, and feet. And there are a lot of famous people that have suffered from acromegaly. It's often essentially a side effect of gigantism. So the wrestlers like Andre the Giant, Antonio Bigfoot Silva, the MMA fighter, the former UFC fighter, and notably a wrestler from back in the day, Maurice Tillet, known as the French Angel, who was the inspiration for the design of Shrek. They all suffered from varying degrees or varying severities of acromegaly, which on top of the disorder also causing, pain and other medical issues, it does cause them to look very different. The elongated and the big jaw of the face and the widening of the hands. And so this is a real thing that some people do deal with, and for the movie to treat acromegaly as basically becoming a monster is a messed up thing to do. Now there's the added issue with Anthony being a concert pianist is that he needs his hands to be, he has to, when your fingers swell up to twice the size that they used to be, you can no longer play the piano. And also his head was, gigantic, which is a extremely blown out of proportion representation of what acromegaly really does. So that in that case, it's kind of messed up what the movie did there. But, unfortunately, you're always going to run into things like this when you try to run movies from the past, like from 60, 70 years ago, through the lens of our modern concept of morality. So, kind of putting that aside and acknowledging that, I enjoyed the movie as a whole, and I would recommend it. So that actually brings us to 2 out of 4 as far as the recommendeds on these, as opposed to not recommending. So we'll go ahead and draw the next 2 movies for the classic horror series here. Let's see. And we've got Swamp Women from 1955. And Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George A. Romero's classic. Alright guys, well that's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. I just ask you, if you did, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you.